Suguru Geto has since been revealed as one of Jujutsu Kaisen's main antagonists, citing his hatred of having to exercise curses as his motivation to wipe out non-sorcerers from existence. The consequences of his actions, however, ironically place his fellow sorcerers in harm's way, as well as employ the use of the very same curses he hates. Despite the obvious incongruencies in his plan, and the overall parallels his goals have to humanity's most evil actions, could it be that Suguru Geto may actually have a point? Hello Funkers, Tony Funk here, and today we're going to explore the motivations behind Geto's evil plan to rid the world of both non-sorcerers and the curses they create, and whether or not the idea has a grain of altruism behind the obvious evil pretense. Before we explore the merits of Geto's plan, we have to understand how Suguru Geto thinks, and by extension, his rationale for his extreme views. For starters, during the prequel arc of Season 2, Geto appeared to be sympathetic towards non-sorcerers, despite hating his job as a sorcerer. This is evidenced when after Gojo is reprimanded by Masamichi Yaga for not using a curtain, or a veil, Geto explains that curtains exist to protect non-sorcerers from their own emotions, since they eventually manifest into curses. We then see Geto ascribe a moral obligation to being a Jujutsu sorcerer, claiming that it is the duty of the strong to protect the weak, an idea which Gojo surprisingly rejects. This explanation given by Geto acts as his credo for continuing to work as a sorcerer despite hating the job. Unlike Gojo then, Geto sees protecting others as a duty that those who are capable must fulfill. This sets up the basis for Geto's ethos, as well as his overall conflict with Gojo. While Gojo enjoys his job as a Jujutsu sorcerer, Geto sees his role as a means to an end, with that end being the mitigation of suffering for those he considers weak. This means that unlike Gojo, Geto seeks an endgame for his everyday sacrifices, which he eventually realizes is unattainable. Geto's disgust in non-sorcerers did not appear until he and Gojo failed their mission in allowing Riko to merge with Tengen. It is implied that during their mission, both Gojo and Geto grew close to Riko due to the time they spent together to ensure her safety. So much so that Geto is even seen going against his superiors by allowing Riko to choose her own destiny and forfeit her merge in exchange for a normal life. This detail in the story is meant to show us that despite Geto being a no-nonsense sorcerer who respected the hierarchy of Jujutsu High, was willing to disobey the rules due to his newfound attachment to Riko. This sympathy then became a source of rage following Riko's immediate assassination by the hands of Toji Fushiguro, who, by the way, was a non-sorcerer hell-bent on destroying the Zenin family, which is one of the most important sorcerer clans. This sets the stage for Geto's moral conflict of interest. On one hand, he finds himself morally obligated to obey his superiors at Jujutsu High, so that he may protect those who require sorcerers to combat curses. But on the other hand, he finds that non-sorcerers can also be threats to sorcerers, thus invalidating the idea that they are morally entitled to protection. This moral conflict became more pronounced when Geto realized that the non-sorcerer members of the Time Vessel Association, who erroneously worshipped Tengen as a god, celebrated Riko's death due to their belief that Tengen's purity as a deity would be tampered with if she happened to merge with another individual. These two events proved that non-sorcerers did not have a net neutral influence on sorcerers of the world, but rather could orchestrate plots to kill his fellow sorcerers, while at the same time being entitled to sorcerer protection. This dynamic obviously strained Geto's motivations to work as a sorcerer for Jujutsu High, given that he was only doing it because he thought it was the ethical thing to do, given his position. It isn't until Geto spoke to Yuki Tsukumo where he realized that non-sorcerers didn't just create curses, but rather were the only ones who created curses. This revelation, followed by Tsukumo's elaboration on how the practice of exercising curses was futile due to the fact that they were only a symptom of non-sorcerers' collective negative emotions, caused Geto to find a new ethical calling: genocide. Now, obviously Geto is in the wrong, and no amount of mental gymnastics could justify such an abhorrent solution. But having said that, it's important to understand the subtext laid out by series creator Gege Akutami in order to appreciate Jujutsu Kaisen's genius social commentary. And in doing so, we can see what moral observation Suguru Geto was actually right about. During the first 2 seasons of Jujutsu Kaisen, we are shown time and again the destructive power that curses inflict on non-sorcerers. These curses, being Akutami's interpretation of the paranormal phenomena known as egregores, surge from humanity's negative emotions and manifest into poltergeists, invisible to those without the gift of clairvoyance, or, in Jujutsu Kaisen's case, sorcerers. The significance of these curses being derivatives of the real world's esoteric and religious concept, known as egregores, is that historically, they have been associated with premeditated malice. This means that negative emotions in a vacuum do not create egregores, but rather the will to do harm unto others. Since egregores, then, are a collection of ill-intentioned thoughts and desires, Akutami's depiction of curses are meant to ascribe intent, meaning that they arise from the conscious hatred and evil of non-sorcerers. This layer of subtext behind curses means that non-sorcerers are not so innocent victims of their own malice. When we look at curses from this angle then, we realize that sorcerers are acting as cops who allow non-sorcerers to be evil with impunity by destroying the consequences of their evil thoughts and actions. Sorcerers, knowing this, are ultimately painted in a bad light, serving their roles not as moral obligations, but for personal ends. For example, Gojo is shown to reject the notion that his job has any moral benefits for the weak, instead doing it because he finds the challenge fun. Maki Zenin's motivation is equally vain, with her taking up the role in order to spite her family, with her sister Mai doing it to not lose face. Kento Nanami, on the other hand, became a jujutsu sorcerer because it was the only profession where he felt appreciated, with his previous job as a salesperson, leaving him feeling unacknowledged. Yuji Itadori and Megumi Fushiguro, on the other hand, are the only 2 characters who seem to have a moral obligation to help others, using their roles as sorcerers as a means to accomplish this goal. Itadori takes up the responsibility of a sorcerer to follow his late grandfather's advice to help others, whereas Fushiguro's motivation is to create karmic fairness in an otherwise unfair world. Having said that, neither character understands the implications of their jobs in the long run, outside of the immediate good they do for non-sorcerers. An idea which both characters eventually confront later in the manga. So then, if being a sorcerer who exercises curses perpetuates more negative behavior by cleaning up non-sorcerers' mistakes, does that mean Geto was right in denouncing Jujutsu High's intentions? Yes, that's exactly what it means. You see, Jujutsu High is shown to be dogmatic, flawed, and even sinister, with Gojo denouncing their structure and offending their leadership whenever given the chance. Tengen's existence is also explicitly disturbing, with her life being periodically rejuvenated by human sacrifices. Not only this, but main character Yuji Itadori was originally slated to die following his consumption of one of Sukuna's fingers, so though veiled as an overall altruistic organization, their methods have been shown to be unsympathetic. So, if there's one thing Geto is right about, it's that there's nothing moral about working with Jujutsu High. But if being a sorcerer as depicted in Jujutsu Kaisen perpetuates suffering, is there anything anyone can do? As teased by Yuki Tsumuko, there is a solution out there that doesn't involve killing all non-sorcerers, that is. But though this solution hasn't been revealed yet, I think I can take a stab at it based on everything Jujutsu Kaisen has been pointing towards. This solution being the abolition of secrecy. Allow me to explain. Jujutsu High has been shown to implement a curtain policy for every conflict against curses. It's this specific policy that Gojo and eventually Geto reject that sustains the excuse for Tengen's continued existence. But how exactly? It is implied that only a select few non-sorcerers know about the existence of curses and cursed energy. This means that the majority of the public is unaware of how their intentions transform into curses. This, of course, causes them to create curses in perpetuity, while unwittingly relying on sorcerers to fix their problems. However, one thing that has also been implied is that anyone can both see and exercise curses, given that they have the right cursed artifacts. So though it's impossible to keep all the non-sorcerers from creating curses after creating mandatory curse education programs, Jujutsu sorcerers can let non-sorcerers deal with their own curses. 2 examples of adept curse-killing non-sorcerers are Maki and Toji. Maki was able to surpass the powers of her twin sister despite her being a prodigy, without being able to use cursed energy solely through skill and athleticism, with the help of cursed glasses to see curses as well. Toji, on the other hand, was not only powerful enough to kill sorcerers through sheer battle prowess, but he was also capable of sensing curses without having to see them by training his other senses. This means that if sorcerers disclosed their existence and allowed non-sorcerers to collaborate with them, non-sorcerers could eventually create police departments trained specifically to police curses, as opposed to letting sorcerers risk their lives combating issues that they had no part in. The solution would no longer posit non-sorcerers as liabilities who are unaware of how their actions and thoughts create devastating problems. Not only this, but Jujutsu sorcerers could then focus on more consequential actions, such as creating cursed weapons for non-sorcerers to use, as well as to keep watch on other bad sorcerers. By doing this, Geto's entire argument would fall to pieces, because then, sorcerers would no longer have to worry about non-sorcerers' problems, and curses would essentially resolve themselves. Ironically, I believe Tengen, though being somewhat of a good entity, would be the greatest obstacle for this solution. After all, I believe Tengen has a vested interest in keeping secrecy, because then Jujutsu High would not need to be veiled and Tengen's purpose might be greatly diminished. The Jujutsu Kaisen manga has not ended yet, so we don't really know the endgame of the Jujutsu Kaisen universe, but I wouldn't be surprised if both sorcerer and non-sorcerer worlds merge in the very end. So ultimately, Suguru Geto does have a point. Jujutsu High's archaic rules regarding secrecy only hurt both factions of humans, but to say his plan was anything other than a PR move to justify his hatred for non-sorcerers would be just plain bullshit. I'd like to give a big thanks to members Rokus, Scythaboy, Rishtig X, and Ayanami Ray for voting for this video. These videos are possible thanks to y'all's support, so thanks everyone. And as always, I shall see yas down the road.